National news in his native country. So he has helped this next generation of talent, and Nodirbek Abdusattorov is leading that charge. And we have what?
G6? And Hikaru is usually the one to play G6. And this is transposed into an Alapin Sicilian.
So we're both happy about that because we love the Alapin.
Oh, yeah. How many? Whoa, an E5. How many weird moves to A6? What is happening here, Howard? What is this? I've never seen any of this before.
Please don't make me translate what's happened in this game because I don't fully understand. We start with G6 on move one, not typical at this time control at the top level of chess. So we saw an early G6 transposing into a Sicilian, an Alapin, and now look at the structure, right? We have the connect four, and that's why black played F6, chiseling at the structure we'll take back with the knight to develop, and white can take this pawn on C5. So it is a pawn sacrifice. You're not getting that pawn back right away, but black would have E5 striking in the center, and that's the theme of the position right now.
Yes, it is. There's a battle over control of the E5 square, which currently E5 is not possible. White is controlling that square, but black's got a lot of these auxiliary ideas. Notice how the F file, it's half open. On the one hand, you could say, oh, that means the black king is weak, but that might be true. But in addition, black now has an avenue to attack white's king from. That knight swinging to F4. The pawn on D4 is under pressure. Nodirbek, he's making his intentions very clear from the start. He's playing for a win right out of the gates.
And there might be a rook takes F3. Do not take your eyes off that exchange sacrifice because you'll win the D4 pawn. And then black will have a knight and this massive pawn center for the cost of that rook. And the point is that once we are able to take on D4 with our knight, we'll push E5. Our pawns are advancing, and white would have to be very careful about that.
Yeah, anybody who's played the French on the white side has probably been victimized by more than one of these exchange sacrifices. The eval bar is assigning an edge for white, but I actually really like the way Nodirbek is playing. This is going to be a really entertaining game.
It certainly will. And E5, so tempting right now. And I think a major point is that for E5, white would like to play C4. We see that E4 is the threat, and C4 is trying to break down this pawn center, because if you play E4, then you could take on D5, and now this knight on C6 is under attack once you take the knight on F3. And I think people miscalculate, or they misevaluate these types of positions, Danya, where you start taking pieces in front of the enemy king, so you must be winning. But no, white has too much material in that sequence.
Agreed. And yeah, at the end, white just takes everything, and then there's no mate. Knight F4 by Nodirbek. So I think he wants to push this bishop back to F1 first, and then follow up with E7, E5. Now, of course, Hikaru could capture that knight, but giving away the dark squared bishop here, that's a pretty committal decision, one that shouldn't be undertaken without proper thought. Hikaru dropping it to C2. Robert, I mean, E5, this looks pretty darn good for black now.
Yeah, E5 feels automatic, but we know that when we play E5, D5 becomes a target. So after E5, there might be a bishop takes knight on F4, followed by a bishop B3, hitting the pawn D5, also pinning it. So Nodirbek says, I have no fear. He's going for it, but we have to watch out, because the center could collapse if he's not careful.
And I think the eval bar preferred for the bishop to park itself on F1, maybe to lend a little bit of support to the white king. Bishop B3, this is Hikaru's idea. He is applying pressure on D5, as you indicated, and maybe he wants to meet bishop B6 with something cheeky. There's knight D4 idea sometimes, but I can't make it work. What is Hikaru's concrete idea here?
Well, he just plays knight D2.
Okay,
he's stopping E4. Very important, because E4, you want to kick that knight out of F3, go after the F2 pawn. But as Donna just showed you, knight takes E4. The bishop's hanging with check. Very important, because otherwise E takes F3 would be a second piece going down.
So E4 is impossible. Queen F8 is one option, but that allows knight G5. So black has to keep his eyes on a lot of different squares, a lot of different tactical options. Maybe Queen E7 to hit C5 and involve the other rook.
And perhaps King H8, because one of the things that I'm looking at here, or I was just thinking about, is that white's next move, let's say you handed white the turn, knight E4 is a great move for white, either aiming to the D6 square or to G5 to get rid of the bishop on E6. So that's a threat, but after King H8, it no longer is possible because of what we were talking about, where you take on E4, take on E6 would be check. So he plays Queen F6 just to defend the bishop right away. Cannot fault him for that move. But at some point, I think we will see that king slide at the corner, and that rook on A8 is about to join the party on F8. So this seems like an issue for Hikaru down the F file.
And then if a pawn storm starts on G5, H5, G4, white cannot afford to lose this F2 pawn. Hikaru has to get things going in the center somehow. I thought King H8 was an excellent move. Sort of taking the sting out of all of these ideas like Knight G5. And you don't want to constantly have to keep your eye on those ideas when you're attacking. You want to be able to focus your energies on developing that attack. Rook AFA, G5, H5. Hikaru moving his knight back to F1. I like that move a lot. He has to apply pressure on D5. This is his only big target. He's got to attack it with everything that he's got.
And it's one of the reasons why I like keeping the queen on d8, because now black has to spend a turn defending that d5 pawn. And rook to d8, there could be a knight e3, that knight developing from b1 out to the e3 square. And now we can see where white's counterplay is coming from. And black currently is down a pawn. Let's not forget that. So you do not want to lose a second pawn. You would have to have an overwhelming initiative to make up for it.
And we should point out that e4 meets with bishop takes d5, similar ideas to what we showed in other lines. You take white takes with check. If only the king was on h8. And after rook d8, Hikaru probably planning to get his knight to e3. And in some variations, I would even play king h8 at the cost of the d5 pawn, so that when you play e5, e4, you don't have to constantly worry about checks along this diagonal.
For sure, because the f2 pawn is loose. So if black can successfully play e4 and the knight moves, down goes that f2 pawn, which is very important for shielding the white king. So king h8 right now actually looks like a great choice, because bishop d5 might be met with some kind of a rook d8, and then e4 is happening. And if you play c4 for white, then you're giving control over a lot of the board. Rook takes c4, as you just showed, is a free pawn. Even if it weren't a pawn that you could capture, it looks like the position's opening up favorably for black.
No, this is exactly, okay, maybe e4 specifically here is wrong, but this is the kind of position that Nodirbek wants. He's taking a pretty long time. He's gone into the tank. Rook d8 is the automatic move, but you have to calculate e4. That doesn't seem to work. As we showed, rook d8 and king h8 might transpose into each other if white plays knight e3 and bishop takes d5.
And knight e7 not possible, because the e5 pawn would be loose. So you have to defend the d5 pawn. Tactically defending with king h8 feels like the better play here for Nodirbek, and he's down a bit on the clock. We have to mention once more that there is a 2-second increment, so he's not very concerned about being flagged, not like he would have if he played this game a day ago.
Right. Although, when you go down to 30 seconds against Hikaru, the flagging itself isn't the only issue. It's also the fact that he knows exactly how to create difficulties. You simply will not be able to find a move in time. And here is where we like king h8. Get the king out of dodge, but Nodirbek going concrete e4. And things are heating up big time. Is knight takes d5 possible here?
That's the big question, because that knight takes d5 hits the queen on f6, and so knight takes d5. I guess you play bishop d5. Yeah, bishop takes with check.
King h8.
King h8.
Look at white's pieces. Oh.
You can't take on e4 because that bishop is pinned. So rook takes e4 just loses a rook, and otherwise you're dropping this pawn on f2. So it seems like Hikaru's king is going to be in danger, and that is why e4 was played.
And that means he's got to move his knight. Where does he go? If he moves back once again, he will either lose f2 or black doesn't have to necessarily rush with taking him. There's other ideas, knight e5, knight d3. The knight can move forward to d4, Robert, and Hikaru could try to trade all of the pieces on the d4 square and then quickly get his other rook into the game and once again press down on the gas pedal and attack d5.
So knight d4, you lose the pawn on d4 directly if black wants it. And that in and of itself would probably make me not want to play this.
Same.
Like after rook a d1, the most natural move, hitting the bishop, hitting d5, bishop takes c5. You can't take d5 because f2 once again is the target. So white does not solve all of his problems by trading the queens, and you think that your king is safe. No, your king can still get in danger. So one other move, Danya, is knight h2, because you do stop rook takes f2 with that move because of the knight fork on g4, but it does welcome black to play d5 to d4, and that opens the position up that knight on c6 will have a good time on d4.
And white's pieces might simply not be active enough to handle the opening of the center there. Discover check ideas. f2 is hanging. White has to keep his eyes on many different things. Hikaru is in a very uncomfortable position here as he takes a long time himself trying to figure out where to put that knight. I think knight d4 and knight h2 are the two main candidate moves. I don't know if he's seriously considering knight takes d5. That just seems way too brazen, even by Hikaru's standards.
And you were saying that yesterday, it seemed like after his initial losses to start the event, he couldn't be beaten. Right? Even though Serrano was up a protected pass pawn e6, then it looked like Hikaru just had a walk in the park. So something about Hikaru's style has always given players difficulties, and he, is one of the best players in the world. That's not to be questioned. But even when he has lost positions, he's just so resourceful, and he does play knight h2 here, just stopping rook takes f2 because of knight g4.
And now I really like the move d5, d4. Once again, let me just show rook takes f2 walks right into a fork. So you do not want to chomp on that pawn. It's poisonous. It's definitely time to play d4, because if black procrastinates, if black plays, let's say, king h8 in this position, first of all, knight takes d5 might already be possible. White no longer has to worry about the other knight being hanging. Knight e5, though, by Nodirbek. Well, I was not expecting that at all.
He did stop knight g4, so rook takes f2 becomes a threat. You mentioned knight coming into d3. It looks like a very reasonable choice, but it didn't punish White. And I think that Nodirbek, he played an opening where you have to go for it. And now he's showing a bit of restraint by not playing d4. He needed to explode the board.
D4 would have led to a big initiative for black and an objective advantage we saw on the eval bar. This is still very much decent for black. And I knew this was a maneuver. I just wasn't expecting it here. Now, once again, Hikaru has to bog himself down calculating knight takes d5. His clock is starting to dwindle just a little bit here.
Yes, this is a situation where it feels easier to play for black. You're up now a minute and a half almost on time. You are down that pawn. So we need to talk about the material, and we don't want to be materialistic, but black is in fact still down a pawn. And can the d5 pawn be captured? I think that's a question that everyone wants the answer to, and I guess a little irrelevant now that knight g4 is played.
Hikaru decides that the answer is no. And well, the most obvious thing for Nodirbek, I think you should start by taking with the knight. He does, to keep d5 under lock and key. And will White recapture with the knight, trying to get him to get rid of his bishop and soften up that target on d5?
But queen g5, I don't want that knight.
No.
Right? Queen g5, threatening to take on g4 and protecting d5, and he takes right away. I guess he wants f2, and he wants it now. He wants
to play concretely, and it makes sense. He wants to go for checkmate here. So he decides, does Nodirbek, that after bishop takes d5 check, big deal. I'm just going to tuck my king on h8, and hey, you're just going to walk in a pin. But rook takes e4 by Hikaru. That looks like the better of the two captures. What a sharp position.
And rook takes b2, you can start stealing some of these pawns because c3 is next. But perhaps White has a way to start trading pieces because the white king is less safe. So after rook takes b2, I imagine that rook e2 comes to mind as a candidate move. I think that bishop takes d5 check. You have to think about it every turn. And I mean, I just am worried, though, about allowing this queen into the game for black. So rook e2 would be my instinct if I were playing a bullet game.
Yeah, I'm slightly worried about queen f2, just a little bit. Now, after bishop takes d5, king h8, one important detail is if white goes queen f1 there, the bishop is virtually untouchable. It doesn't matter endgame, middle game, because there's always rook e8. It's not checkmate, but it at the very least forces black to give away the bishop. So Hikaru, though, following the advice of the great Robert Hess, rook back to e2. But Robert, what if Nodirbek just takes and just starts chomping bishop f8?
Oh my gosh.
What a move.
That is it.
Oh my lands, what an idea.
I didn't see that. I thought he was just going to trade, take c3, all that stuff. That's checkmate, right? That would be checkmate. So bishop f8. And if you play bishop takes d5 check, the king just slides away. Now you've walked into a pin, in addition to the taking on c5 being an issue. So g3, giving his king the g2 square. It's a nice light square. And the answer is yes. I was going to say, can Nodirbek go pawn hunting? And g3 now is hanging. c5 is hanging. Rook takes e2 will win the rook on a1. So he trades on b2.
Another pawn.
But he wants to take with check. If king g2, queen takes b2 is check, very importantly. That saves the d5 pawn at the very least. So king h1, you can tuck the king in the corner, but your king still doesn't feel very happy to be there.
Hikaru's got his back against the wall, and rook f2, there would be queen takes g3. He's down 2 pawns currently. He can take on d5, but I don't know if he can afford to pin himself in this position. That king on h8 is going to be very safe, and black has a monopoly over the dark squares, which means it's going to be really hard for white to set up some sort of checkmate pattern with a queen on d4.
And what just happened in Nodirbek? There he is. Okay, like his camera shifted,
right?
So we can't see him fully. But rook c1 by Hikaru. So what's the material count now? It's black is up 2 pawns, right?
Ooh. Yes, but white's king is safer than it looks. It's very hard to get to it. And Hikaru activating that rook, forcing that bishop to decide where it's going to go. This is not quite as bad as it may appear for white. I think Hikaru's got pretty decent chances here.
For sure, because if the queens can come off and it looks like a move like queen c2 can be next, or it shields the king on h1. And if the queens are traded, even though black is up material, 2 extra pawns, opposite color bishops, there tend to be good chances to hold a game like that.
I would consider b6 here by black, just trying to preserve the status quo, keep the bishop on c5 where it sort of supervises the whole position. He plays it, and the ball back in Hikaru's court. He has to decide once again, will he take on d5? He plays rook c2, shooing the queen away, but now Nodirbek stabilizing his material advantage.
That's right. But look at white's pieces all defended. That's going to be important because if black gets a queen e4 check, let's say king g2, queen e4 check, the queen can actually block on f3 because the bishop defends the rook over there. And Danya, the important question is, what trades does Hikaru want? Is he willing to just get the queens off the board if that means black has 2 extra pawns? I'm not sure that he really wants to get in that endgame. It looks at first like it might be closer to losing than a draw, but we see the current eval at -1. So we know what the evaluation is. The players do not. He goes rook e2.
Another super accurate move.
Oh my gosh, he wants a... Okay, so if queen takes g3, which looks like a free pawn, bishop b5 check, king g7.
Oh no, or king...
Well, that's
g7,
worse.
yeah, that's worse.
But queen a1, and then here, and then you have queen c1 check, I think.
You staircase your way up to b2, then you throw in a check on g5, and the idea is to goad the king into alignment with the queen.
Oh my gosh.
Are you serious right now? I mean, Nodirbek is not going to go for this. He might not even calculate that whole line. You just don't go for this against Hikaru. So black has to keep the d5 pawn protected. Maybe bishop e3. That's not out of the question here.
But bishop e3, the downside is that the d pawn is pinned. So it goes queen g5. But you want to play bishop
g2. Nope.
Oh, he goes king g2. And now king g7. King has to leave that diagonal because what black wants is bishop e3 and maybe pawn d4 to solidify the defense of that bishop, and that closes down the rook on e2. But if you ever push that d pawn, that opens up the b3 bishop towards the enemy king, so there could be some problems with the queen infiltration. So you have to be very, very careful before you push that pawn.
And from a positional standpoint, if you push it, you're also going to blunt your own bishop. So black's king is never fully safe. Neither is white's king. Hikaru now down below 2 minutes, g4. It's not currently hanging because of rook e7 check, but that last move, I thought Hikaru might have needed to play rook d2 just a little bit faster. Now the opportunity train might have passed on winning the d5 pawn. He still tries. Will Nodirbek go d4?
He could also, he plays d4, yes. And you mentioned how the bishop on c5 isn't thrilled, but there could be a future where you can push that pawn to d3. It's not, okay.
Whoa.
You know what's interesting, Danya? Queen e3 almost works. So if you trade queens, right? You trade queens and you take, and the push e2, the rook does come to e and stop the pawn, but it's close. So rook d7, simple move. That rook is going to e7 and then to e3, and that king on g2, it was safe for a moment. Not looking so safe when that rook lands on the e3 square.
And there's nothing forced yet. It's just that white's position is deteriorating by the move as Nodirbek keeps pushing Hikaru closer and closer to the ledge. Hikaru cannot afford to lose another pawn. Queen has to drop forward to f3 to keep g4 protected, I think. And Nodirbek could even start pushing his queenside pawn, but no, he goes for the queen trade.
So he's answering the question. We kept asking, is a queen trade into this endgame, is it good, give chances to draw, or should it be winning? The evaluation bar says it's winning. So queen takes e3, you'll take with the pawn.
That's definitely winning.
That's a problem. And you have another pass pawn in the making on the queen side. So you can't avoid a queen trade.
No, and rook on the 7th rank is so well placed. Hikaru, the best that he can do is try to trade on his own terms. Nodirbek, you didn't need to tell him twice. Now I would start pushing the pawns on the queen side. He gives a check on e2.
Don't play
getting
rook f2.
It active.
Rook f2 would have lost in the spot.
E3. Oh, it's e3.
Yes. Yeah, rook e3 is an interesting question, but there is a rook f7 check. Probably didn't want to allow the activity. So how does black win this? Is it just a b5 and okay, king h? That's a good answer to the question.
Phenomenal technique. And now Hikaru trying his best to confuse Nodirbek. He could have gone a5 there, but instead he goes after the g4 pawn. We have a version of a trade. Can Hikaru pull off another miracle? And that's what it would take for him to save this. With 2 pawns down, 1 minute on the clock, Robert. This looks grim.
And he goes king g5. I thought he was going to go king h3, bring the king all the way in there because it looks a little risky with your king having so few moves, but I don't think that there was any checkmating possibilities. And rook to b3. So this is the big moment. Is rook e3 available? And is trading rooks winning for black? He says yes. The eval bar says maybe not.
Yeah, but I wouldn't necessarily. I mean, sometimes the engine needs to reach a high depth to properly evaluate this. The problem, though, Robert, I don't think Nodirbek should have given up a6. I don't think he should have given that up. Even if the pawn appeared on a5, there is still the possibility of breaking through with b6, b5, and creating a passer on the queen side. That would have been very valuable in an endgame like this. Now I can focus his energies only on the king side.
And part of the problem is the pawns are too close for black. That once rook e3, d takes e3, we get to this situation that now white can even play g4, because what you want to leave black with is an h pawn with the dark squared bishop. And the reason why is that won't be now h5. Ooh.
They're missing a g4.
Yeah, g4 is very important. h5 needs to be played.
h5. Nodirbek, by going h5, he's preventing g4, because then I think the move is simply h4. He goes bishop d6, back to g3. Now there's a win.
h5.
Bishop takes bishop down, bishop takes g3.
Oh my goodness.
And then king goes around to d2, and Nodirbek wins on the spot.
He's going to play it.
Oh, whoa, it misses it.
Well, h5.
That is just...
h5 was good for so long that, you know, I'm happy.
E8. Or no?
Bishop e8, then you could take on or king d3.
Bishop e8, probably king d3, but Hikaru, he can go back to e2 first, and then bishop takes g3, he goes bishop in, he gets the good version of this position, his clock ticking down.
Wow.
Oh, he plays it?
E2.
No,
but
bishop e2. Bishop takes g3.
g5 is good. You can just push that pawn to g4.
It's over. It's winning.
King c3, king d2, and then the g pawn falls. Wow.
All my lands.
And it's a win. And Nodirbek Abdusattorov, the world rapid champion, takes down Hikaru Nakamura. What a game from Nodirbek. I mean, he almost let it slip there towards the end, but he was in control from the very start.
That is a tremendously instructive endgame. And let's make no mistake, it is almost impossible to play it accurately with the clock situation. That was an amazing game. He goes g6 on move one. What a gutsy opening choice. And after he went f7, f6, Robert, there just was a sense that he took over the initiative from the start. Hikaru's position might have been good at some point, but it was always just uncomfortable from a practical perspective.
For sure. The pawn sacrifice was justified, and that was a convincing victory from Nodirbek Abdusattorov. There were some stumbles down the stretch, some missed opportunities for Hikaru to hold.